Today on Locked On Rockies, a position that has historically been not great for the Rockies. Catcher. What do the Rockies look like behind the dish this year? Were we too high on Elias Díaz? Is there a bounce back year? How much stock do we have to put in the Rockies catcher? We break it down and talk a little bit about the pitch clock on today's episode of Locked On Rockies.
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans, welcome into the Locked On Rockies podcast for today, the 24th day of February in the year 2023. I am your host of the Locked On Rockies podcast, Paul Holden, bringing you your daily Colorado Rockies talk right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your team each and every day. If your team is the Colorado Rockies, you are in the right spot. That's what we do around here is talk Rockies, talk shop, here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Today on the Locked On Rockies podcast, we are going to finish talking, I guess I count it as an infield position. I bet you by the definitions and by the rules, it's not infield, but the catcher sits in a small pile of dirt that is connected to the rest of the infield. So I am going to go ahead and make catchers part of the infield. And so we'll talk about catchers and we will talk about pitch clock because that's the big conversation today for all of baseball. I'm seeing takes, I'm seeing clips, I'm seeing Manny Machado get a strike. We're going to talk about that as well. But let's start with catcher. Catcher is an interesting position. I mean, it doesn't have as much intrigue to me as the other positions because one of my things, and I said this last year too, we can't get too bullish on some of these interesting catchers. And Elias Díaz has been fine, but due to the Rockies' lack of power, and I think due to kind of their mindset, the Rockies leaned on Elias Díaz to be something that he's not, because Elias Díaz's 2021 season is a bit of an anomaly in some regards to when you look at his performance of home runs, especially. Elias Díaz has never gotten that close to 20 home runs in his life. He's, in fact, only hit double-digit home runs one other season outside of that 2021 season with the Rockies. He just fell one short of that last year. And why do I bring up home runs? That's because that's kind of what we thought Elias Díaz was supposed to be going into last year, and it just didn't work out. And Elias Díaz kind of played some sloppy defense as a catcher last year in terms of throwing errors and mistakes with the ball. I'm not too sold on Elias Díaz really getting he is not the de facto starter. This year, it will be Brian Serven. Serven will be the Rockies' go-to. I mean, we saw that. We know that. And Serven is fine, too. There's nothing that Serven did last year that necessarily turned me off from what he was. It's a pretty classic catcher line for what he did. But if you're looking at it in terms of what he can bring compared to Díaz, in 187 at-bats, Serven got 6 home runs. And Elias Díaz, he got 9 home runs and 351 at-bats. And so he also, Serven was also only about almost reached half of Díaz's hits, and I guess a little over half the at-bats, more than half the at-bats. So it's not like it's not like Elias Díaz or Brian Serven are bad. I don't necessarily think they're detriments to your team, but they're not great. They're not big impactful players. We're going to see Brian Serven or Elias Díaz bat 7th or 8th, and they're going to run into a ball, and it'll be fine, and it'll be exciting. But until Drew Romo is in the mix, who continues to be one of the Rockies' top prospects. I believe he was coming in at I think like number 4 or something on Purple Rose list. For in 374 at bats in minor leagues for Drew Romo last year. 95 hits, 5 home runs, 58 RBIs, 18 stolen bases with a line of 254, 320, average 254 OPP of 321 and an OPS of 693. I know that's the minors, but that's the highest OPS out of the 3. And he also had the highest on base percentage out of the 3 and the highest batting average out of the 3. Again, apples to oranges, not really the most fair conversation with Drew Romo playing in the minors, and especially at the lower levels in the minor league versus these two being at the major league level. But what I'm trying to just, I was thinking about this. I just don't have too much on what these players do for you, because it's not the worst thing that the Rockies went with Diaz. Honestly, he was good when he was good, and on the pickup from the Rockies, fine. He's got a good, he's definitely got a good relationship with some of his pitchers as well. But the dude had 11 errors last year. Elias Díaz. 11 errors, and a lot of them were really costly throwing errors that just weren't really great. I mean, and just absolute killers as well. I mean, on the flip side, he has the most assists of his career, not the most putouts, but you can't give teams free chances. And when your catcher's out there throwing the ball all over the yard, it's not good. On top of the fact that Elias Díaz just went through cold stretch after cold stretch at the dish, where you're not overly confident in his consistency. So for me, why not go with the Serven? Because here's the interesting thing. Diaz he's so streaky. I think that's kind of like a big thing too with catchers in general, is that he can be so streaky, but let's just look at some of the offensive numbers here. We'll look at the batting line throughout the season last year for Elias Díaz. This is April, 263, 300, 439. That's average OBP slugging. That's the line we're going. So a 263 average, 300 OBP, and a 439 slugging. Plummets in May to 163, 229, 194. Again, average OBP slugging. In June, a little bit of a bounce back, comes back from 161 up to 241, 293, and 444. A big improvement. And exactly, honestly, what you're trying to see. That's a good line for Elias Díaz right in that mix. It's not great, but a 241, 230, 293, 444 with 11 RBI in that time and 3 home runs in June for him. And then he puts it together again for a nice July. Gets that batting line 298, 385, 474. Picks up another 11 RBIs in that month, another home run there. Then it's another just complete fall off at the worst times in the season too, especially if the Rockies were competitive. They weren't so much this year. It didn't really necessarily matter, but goes from back-to-back great months. And then in August, 190, 244, 238. And he played a good chunk in August as well. Not as much as he did in June and July. August was his one of his least played months there. I think he was injured a little bit there as well. So that's a factor. And then in September, 224, 254, 343 average there in the line. And then October, just the 3 games left there, 167, 167, 167. So Elias Díaz will generate RBIs for the Rockies. He will. But he'll also have a couple of months where it'll just be kind of some stinkers and kind of the inconsistency. And then you're sitting there and you're like, how much do we really want to watch this guy play defense? Unfortunately, when I wanted to find where Rockies catchers ranked. And it was hard to kind of find some of these things in some of the standings, but I found a top 25 list, every top 10 list I found. Elias Díaz and Brian Serven are nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. There's one here on the catching leaders on Baseball Prospectus here I think this has a ton of advanced stats and things like that. So this is defensively what this stuff is focusing. And Brian Serven comes in on 11th on that list. So Brian Serven's got some interesting defensive numbers. He's also younger and also the guy that I think we should be more interested in and should be our everyday starter for the Rockies at catcher. We'll talk more about Serven here coming up in segment number 2. Talk a little bit more about the state of catcher as well. But before we do that, got to tell you about our friends at Built Bar. Folks, it is prime time for snacking because you got hikes, you got kids' sporting events, you got to go to school, you got to do this, that, the other thing. Well, why don't you get yourself a Built Bar so you can have a treat that's covered in 100% real chocolate while only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. You can see all the delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut, almond, brownie batter, cookies and cream, double chocolate. They even got the puffs. Everything you could need. They got it at Built.com. They even are in your local Sam's Club and Walmart. That's right, folks. You don't have to just head to Built.com to get your hands on a Built Bar. You can head to your local Sam's Club or Walmart today and get you a 13-bar box, a 4-bar box of your favorite flavor. You can see all the macros, see all the flavors, see more for yourself of what's going on at Built.com. The 100% real chocolate-covered protein bar snack, that is a tasty treat for you. Believe me, you'll love it when you bite into a Built Bar. This is the Locked On Rockies podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and streaming on your favorite streaming services, and we're also streaming live and first on the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel, where you can subscribe and be part of the Locked On Rockies YouTube live chat, just like Brandon Kramer, Nicholas Delvo, Eric Harper, Adrian Ortega, and Ryan Tartlesky, Leandro, and more are today. Let's take a look at the live chat here. Get a little bit of the responses from the live chat. And, before we dive into live chat, remember, you can make Locked On MLB Prospects your second listen of the day. You can also make Locked On Broncos, Locked On Avalanche, Locked On Nuggets, and Locked On Buffs if you want more Colorado sports action. Let's take a look here. Brandon Kramer says, when your franchise catcher is Yorvit Torrealba, all these guys look fine for us. Man, I love Yorvit, though. Yorvit was fun, but that's exactly the mindset to have. It's not like Elias Díaz. You sit there and you're like, hey, he's not. I don't think Elias Díaz is bad. It's just I don't think Elias Díaz is great or necessarily game-changing. And I don't necessarily think he's shown enough consistency, especially with the big step down from 2021 into 2022. Adrian Ortega says, Diaz had rookie errors. Yeah, the way that Diaz was throwing the ball on some throwdowns, the way the Rockies, and it wasn't just Diaz, it was kind of, he was part of it, especially when the Rockies were going through with it. It was in some of the struggles of the season and some of their losing streaks and some of the bad stretches of baseball. But that's an error. It's just like booted balls. You know, you cannot be throwing the ball away. Absolutely not. It just is so. It's so pivotal. It's so important to treat the ball well, to be a good defender. I just think that Diaz is not as elite behind the dish as a defender as we would like to be. He did have that wrist sprain in August. That's what why he didn't play so much in August as well. Let's take a look at Brian Serven here. And Ryan Tartlesky says, Serven was a pleasant surprise at first, but after June, he was so bad. Didn't look like an MLB hitter. And that's the tough part, being a young guy too. I mean, he certainly did not, he certainly cooled off. I mean, he came on for really, really well. And Serven played most of the year for the Rockies here as well. He got the call up and played in mid-May in those first games in May. Here he was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in his first 7 games with the Rockies. 250 average, an OBP of 286, and a slugging of 550. In that time, 5 RBIs, a couple of home runs, and 5 hits. In June, really started, got in a groove, got a lot of playing time, bumps everything up, 333 average, 400 OBP, 467 slugging, adding on a couple more RBIs, left the yard one more time, looking good. And then woof, folks. This drop off. In July, 0.081 batting average, an OBP of 171, a slugging of 189. He did leave the yard once, has the 1 RBIs, but he strikes out 8 times, struck out 10 times in June. So that's 18 strikeouts over the course of those 2 months. And then August, it doesn't necessarily get too much better. He gets that batting average close back up to 196, 250 for the OBP, and slugging of 333. What's he do again? Another double-digit month of strikeouts. 11 strikeouts there. Only the 2 home runs, 6 RBI. So still generating some runs there for the Rockies. And then in September, 143, 172, 179 was his batting line. It just didn't complete cool off. He was, I think it was the classic option of they figured out the young guy. I think I think the league adjusted to him. He didn't adjust to the league. But that's, it's part of the young guy. He went through it, and now there's really no reason to sit there and say, we're going to turn immediately to Elias Díaz. Elias Díaz finished the season better, but neither one of the Rockies catchers really crossed the finish line with glowing numbers. And Adrian also mentions Dom Nunez, and Dom Nunez ain't great. Dom Nunez is not. I'd rather Serven and Diaz than Dom Nunez. I can tell you that. But that's the reality. The Rockies aren't going to have, I don't think, great production from catcher. I don't think you're going to see too much. I think Serven can be better. I think Elias Díaz can hit a handful of home runs in some big situations, and they both can be serviceable catchers. But just like last year, just like the year before that, and basically just like the entire history of the Colorado Rockies, I don't think you should expect too much from the catching position. Neither Brian Serven nor Elias Díaz have shown stuff where they are going to be a JT Realmuto or someone of, something crazy, a Will Smith type of catcher. And that's fine. Out of all the things to watch, out of all the position battles and all the things, catcher is not something I'm kind of focused on, especially because the Rockies have what they believe is the solution. And that's, I think, honestly, a great way to handle catchers, by the way, is try to develop them. Catchers are it's such a hard position, such a weird position. So I think you're going to get, from these two catchers combined, you're going to get a 250 batting average combined between the two. You're going to get a 300 OBP and a high 300 slugging with some home runs. These two will generate runs for the Rockies. These two will knock in some RBI. These two will leave the yard a little bit, but they aren't going to be the big source of power and greatness for the Colorado Rockies. Maybe Brian Serven can lock into what he did when he first came up, and he's going to be a sneaky good little ad, because that'll add a nice little bump. The Rockies catchers being better than expected, the Rockies catchers being a little bit better than we hope. Yeah, that's going to be, we should have that'll be all right. It'll be all right. Pretty amazing when you look at this too, when you look at the history, the highest WAR by wins above replacement by Baseball Reference for a Rockies catcher of all time is 3.2 with Chris Iannetta. He did a 3, and that was in 2008. Iannetta had 3.1 in 2011. Elias Díaz is going to end up, his season will end up as a top 5 Rockies season, or at least tied for a top 5 Rockies catcher season performance with Willeen Rosario from 2013 at 2.2. But Díaz fell off from a 2.2 WAR to a 0.4 WAR. That's a massive drop-off. That's a huge drop-off. It is something that we have to consider. So I'm not really enthused or super pumped on what the Rockies will get out of catcher, but I know that Elias Díaz has good relationships with his pitchers, and I know Brian Serven has young guy potential. So let's hope for the best. But I think the Rockies once again will not be anything special at the catcher's position this year. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. What happens there for the Rockies and Serven and Diaz. I don't necessarily think Romo is going to make the team, especially considering the fact that he spent his time didn't even get into Double-A ball. Yes, last year got up to high A ball. That's why when we were comparing the numbers of the stat lines of the three there in segment number one, we definitely had to make sure we took a big grain of salt with all of that, just because Romo still has time and Romo is facing a completely different level of competition at the moment. So all in all, the state of the Rockies catchers, it's fine. Maybe I would say maybe average to slightly below average would be where the Rockies stand at catcher. But let's hope for a big year from the both of them, because when you're looking for random things or things that on paper that you're kind of following along, and if the Rockies are, winning some ball games, having some success and somehow find their way into relevancy, it will be because Elias Díaz and Serven are contributing to this team. Because if they're contributing to the team, especially in a run generating fashion, then you got some run generation in the back half of your lineup, which is going to be a nice way to move through the bottom part of the order, which has been notoriously hard for the Rockies to do so lately. The Rockies kind of have their things, and then you get to a part of the batting order, and you just kind of hope they get on base or hope they score, because sometimes they just there's just not a lot of oomph in the back half of that lineup. So, again, I don't think the Rockies have anything. I don't think the Rockies top the league in catcher. Like, I would argue that they have contenders, top 5 player contenders at different positions for in at least the National League, maybe in all of baseball. They will be an average to below average catching team. Okay, let's talk about the big news coming out of the first day of spring training. Because, yes, baseball is officially underway in terms of spring training games. I know we've had workouts and things like that. World Baseball Classic coming up as well. But the big change, the big thing, lots of chatter about the pitch clock. And we'll get our first experience with the pitch clock tomorrow. But let's talk about that here coming up in segment number 3. Before we do that, though, got to tell you about the title sponsor of this episode, and that is FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's also America's #1 sportsbook, and new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Let's take a look at what's going on FanDuel right now in the sports book. We could have gotten in on that Nuggets Cavaliers action last night. Big win for the Nuggets. I think they are not playing tonight. I believe they are traveling. They're off tonight. But in case you want to go and bet on the Cavs here, they're sitting at -5 there with the spread. And looks like they're a little bit of the favorites to take down the Atlanta Hawks. Let's see if there's any action going on with the Avalanche tonight, who are taking on the Winnipeg Jets. The Avs, +1.5 is the spread there for the Avs. Looks like the Jets are favored. The over-under 5.5 goals for that one if you want to go bet on your Colorado Avalanche. But you can bet on all sorts of great action and a whole lot more at FanDuel.com. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon for that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Rockies your first listen of the day. We're free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. We are also live on YouTube, where the live chat is popping. Rockies fans are ready for baseball. That is a fact. Y'all have been tuning in a big time here as we get even closer to spring training action. Adrian Ortega says, is the upcoming game going to be broadcasted? I believe the game will be on radio tomorrow. Let me take a look at the spring training schedule. Let's take a quick little peek here. For the Rockies. Oh, this is not the right thing. I'm on a whole different thing. But let's see. Spring training schedule. View schedule. Is it going to say? Yeah. So this weekend's game will be on the radio. Looks like is no nothing for Sunday's game. And then back on the radio for Monday. And I guess there's only a handful of games. I'm trying to see where looking like, if I'm reading this correctly, the first game on TV for the Rockies will be Saturday, March 4th. So not this Saturday, but a week from Saturday against the Mariners. Looks like they will be on Saturday will be, looks like Saturdays are going to be your broadcasted games, your TV broadcasted games here, because if looking at this, it doesn't look like there's a ton on the radio either. That can't be the case. I'm sure there's going to be more on the radio than what's being listed here for these, but looks like Saturdays are going to be your broadcasted spring training games, at least according to that quick look there. But always check your 850 KOA. I would be shocked if it ain't going to happen more. But spring training is really weird. Some teams get a lot of access and others don't. So it doesn't look like this first game will be on TV. So you're going to have to use your ears for this one. Okay. The pitch clock. That's the big topic of conversation today. We're finally seeing it in action. And folks, the immediate takeaway, I don't want to comment too much on it, but people are saying it's weird. People are saying it, but then I'm seeing fifth inning in a spring training game and it's only been an hour. These pace of play things are going to be a tough pill to swallow and a tough adjustment, but it's going to be the right move. I mean, it's really not going to ruin baseball because we have to go through all of the stuff sitting around, and because there's a lot of pace pickup that you're not going to think about after you get used to it. And that includes the players too. I mean, this is the hardest part. This is why it's good to implement this big rule change and give the players a month of doing it. Are they doing pitch clock in World Baseball Classic? That's going to be an interesting question. I would imagine they have to be. Imagine they want the World Baseball Classic to be pretty close to what a spring training environment, at least rule set wise, would be. But this is just an adjustment I think that we're going to just kind of need to roll with. I mean, I think speeding up games is good. I don't think it's going to be something that takes away from the experience. In fact, I think it's going to make you care more about the game. And Leandro says, I think they said they're not using it in the WBC. So we'll see about that. Like I said, I don't want to speculate too much on that, but it could not be there. But I wonder if you are in the World Baseball Classic, if you want to train yourself and get your mind right to get into that, hey, let's pick it up. And I think that once we get into July, we're going to be pretty used to it. And yes, there will be teams, especially to start the season, that will lose a game because of this rule. Absolutely. Is it going to be the Rockies for sure? I don't know. But this is a good change. I really do think it's going to be good. Just because I think allowing the game to have a little bit more flow throughout the whole thing, a constant flow, does help a little. Just kind of breaks up some of the monotony, I think, for fans that are opposed to baseball. Because listen, all y'all out here in the chat, all y'all tuning in, y'all are baseball fans. I mean, it might be weird and it's going to be a different change for you, but is a pitch clock really going to make you not watch baseball anymore? I don't think so. I don't think I don't think this new bigger bases, faster pace of play game is really going to turn diehard baseball fans off from the game. Unless you really care that much about the pageantry, the slowness, the pace, the everything that you've kind of come to know about some of these like weird things in baseball. If you're a real diehard with that, yeah, you'll struggle with that. But I don't think anyone's really going to be too mindful that they're going to shave 20 minutes off a 3-hour experience. I mean, how many times have you fallen asleep of a Rockies game in the 5th inning and woken up in the 8th or how many times have you fallen asleep during a Rockies game in the middle of the day and you wake up and only an inning is passed and you've been asleep for an hour? That's not good. 4-hour baseball games aren't good. They're not entertaining to watch as a fan. They're not entertaining to follow and cover as a podcaster. They're not entertaining to work at. Unless the game is a back and forth, boom, bang, there's all sorts of stuff. But games that sometimes when games drag, they can be so monotonous. And that time is going to add up over the course of the season. Luxay says they're usually 3 hours. I'd say they're closer to 3 and change. I think average game time was a little over 3 hours technically. But if you save 20, 30 minutes a game times 6 games a week, that's significant. And I really honestly do think it's going to help the players too in some ways. I mean, baseball is the most habitual and most they got to, glove adjustments and all of that stuff. I know that's part of what baseball is. I know we all done it, but it's also sometimes a bit much. You don't need to every single time do the full readjustment, do all the stuff. And I was superstitious. I did the same thing every time I stepped into the box. But you can do it quickly. We got sleeves, we got this, we got pads, we got all this stuff that you got to deal with. Now we're just picking all that up. Hey, you want to wear a shin guard? You got to do this. You want to get out of the box, all that stuff. That's fine. But the clock's ticking. Tick, tick, tick. I think this is going to be a good move for baseball. I think these rule changes hopefully will be one way. And I'm actually going to be curious too, because got a lot of non-baseball fans in my life that have to watch Rockies baseball more than they want to due to what I do. So I'm curious to see what they'll think. Because that's what it's really for. I don't think any of you, my listeners, my loyal Rockies fans, I don't think the pitch clock is going to be the reason you stop watching the Rockies this year. I think there might be other reasons the Rockies might turn you off from the game. But it's time to do something new while keeping, plenty of the core parts of baseball alive. Ryan Tartlsky says, I'm a weirdo, but I like the pace of the 7-inning doubleheader games during COVID. I'd be all right with something that drastic. That one's a little more weird for me, but inning length is just an interesting one. I mean, but doubleheaders, is it really that big of a deal to shave off those innings? But the thing, if you're going to do those shortened games in those doubleheaders, the stats are real. A no-hitter in a 7-inning game is a no-hitter. That's where I've come down on it. All those stats for COVID on the doubleheaders and things of that nature, those are real deal. The Dodgers won a legit real World Series. All of that stuff counts for realsies. Because that's the type of mindset you have to have, and you have to be willing to do something different. So I think we need to embrace the pitch clock, and it sounds like initial reviews from the minor league system last year were good, but we will see games, especially in the first half of the season, impacted by the pitch clock. 100%, especially in the first month of the season. Guarantee it. Folks, that is going to do it for the Locked On Rockies podcast for today. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Rockies baseball officially back in action. Players on the field playing baseball tomorrow for the Colorado Rockies. Breaking it all down on Monday through Friday, right here on the Locked On Rockies podcast, free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. You can find us there. When you subscribe, when you leave a review, you help the show out big time. And we got you covered all Rocky season long. Why don't you go make Locked On MLB Prospects your second listen of the day, or the Locked On Broncos, Locked On Avalanche, Locked On Nuggets podcast, and the Locked On Buffs podcast, all available for you to stream. And folks, until next time, this is Paul Holden saying so long from the Locked On Rockies podcast.
You are Locked On Rockies,